Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Boys Table. This is the 5th episode of this podcast. I am joined by IskatuMesk and Patrick, aka Dicksuck, aka Dangling. How's it going?
Pretty good, dude.
So, what? You gonna try and interrupt me on my own fucking podcast? We don't even have one viewer yet. You're already trying to alpha me out there, Mr. Special Forces, man. Let me tell you something. I've been working out lately. I've been checking out my pecs in the mirror, and they just look like sausages for some reason. But that's okay because my prostate
Men like
health is
sausages. Good. You know about Astolfo, don't you?
No, never heard of it.
Now you do.
And on that note, let's move on to the art styles topic of discussion. I recently just concluded playing Armies of Exego, and I actually showed Patrick a couple of choice clips of this game, specifically Tiamorg's voice, and that's all anybody ever needs to know about that game. But one thing that I didn't want to get lost in the deluge of laughing and crying at the voice acting was how good that game looked compared to its contemporaries. Obviously, like, the particles were pretty bad, and there were some weird animations. Like, I really felt like the animations were running at, like, a lower frame rate than anything else in the game, which really made everything very strange. It made everything very, almost like, until you got acclimated to it, it almost made it a little nauseating to see units, like, attack in a really slow manner. Anytime goblins would jump up on Borons, it looked really weird. But the fact of the matter is that if you just look at screenshots, it looks like a game. Well, it actually looks like a game that was made in 2004, as opposed to a game that's running off of an engine from 1992. So when you see something like that, it's definitely something that stands out. Not in a way that you would like, because you would like every game to be like that, at least. But it stands out nonetheless. So I know that Mesk has been in the middle of working on some World of Warcraft videos where he goes through and analyzes the graphics, amongst other things, of World of Warcraft and how the lighting is really fucked up everywhere and all this other stuff. So I figured that this was a common denominator topic. We've all played video games, we've all watched video games, we've all seen video game graphics, and with me just having experienced something that was actually setting some sort of standard with a lot of its, like, terrain and the like, portraits and stuff, and Mesk already launching himself into this topic for his own video series, I figured it would be something useful and enjoyable to talk about. So I guess first we can establish some basic level stuff. I'm only asking this question because some people don't already know the answer. Does Blizzard have an art style, Mesk?
No. They never have had an art style. So obviously the similarities of Lord of the Rings and all that with their games are pretty similar, but there's actually a lot of people who play or are familiar with Blizzard's franchises that aren't aware that Blizzard actually originally wanted rights to Warhammer. They wanted to be able to publish Warhammer titles in much the same sense the joke company Relic did. But for one reason or another, they were not permitted that. So instead, Blizzard created Warhammer anyways. So obviously, the most clear representations are seen in StarCraft, the Eldar, Protoss, the Zerg, Tyranids, down to copy-pasting their colors, their actual physical appearances and proportions, and obviously, you know, Marines and stuff, Space Marines. Now, with World of Warcraft, early into the game, within, like, Classic, you don't really see that much, but obviously Warcraft is very, very heavily based on Warhammer anyways. Obviously, sharing name similarities, orcs and stuff like that, very heavily based on Warhammer Fantasy. Blizzard changes a few things here and there so they don't get obliterated by copyright. It's actually kind of bizarre because if Blizzard, like, just started up today and published this today, they'd probably get sued out of the ground, but for whatever reason, when they were starting up with this stuff, it's really wasn't pounced upon. Kind of like how there's a lot of Japanese titles that really rip off of Geiger and Alien. Yeah, I can't remember the names of them specifically, but there's a lot of aliens and facehuggers and stuff, like literally one-to-one, that never got copyrighted. So, kind of weird, but if you look at any given Warhammer art, it's, I actually have an example here because it's something I am going to discuss in my video. Let me find it.
It was interesting to look at the Geiger example, but it's also true in the East that a lot of the Eastern developers, the Asian developers, would be incredibly referential of, in homage to or whatever. They would
there is
create
a lot
of
weird
references,
cultural differences.
yeah, to like other developers' games. Usually it was, well, a lot of times it was related to gameplay more than graphics, but graphics are how you represent an idea in games usually, especially when you didn't have as much like disk space in the old days to offer voice acting and dialogue and stuff like that. So you would either have text or you would have something visual there, and usually that's where a lot of it came from, at least from what I've seen. I'm not claiming to be an expert in Eastern games necessarily, but
I'm gonna post this in a special bus channel. So, like I was saying with Warcraft, in Classic, they kind of had just generic stuff, but especially in the last like 4 expansions or so, they've been really trying to copy paste Warhammer as much as possible. And Blizzard doesn't have an art style. They don't actually understand how Warhammer's art style works. They have something that's really similar to something called Homunculus. I'm not really familiar with it, but the example was brought up to me because they were really trying to pinpoint where exactly Blizzard stole this from. Because obviously Warhammer was their biggest inspiration because they've been using themes and names and stuff from that forever. But Homunculus is also really similar to their proportions in general, and it's not something Blizzard can ever claim to themselves. It wasn't necessarily a big issue back in Warcraft 2. That was really their best iteration of it. And StarCraft is all right. It's quite readable. It's quite refined version of Warcraft 2, given that they, listen to critique and stuff. But after that, Blizzard started hiring from places like DeviantArt and just stopped caring about graphics entirely, and they used their style as an excuse to create low-quality graphics and skirt, standards more than actually try to establish anything. So you enter like Warcraft 3, you start having a lot of issues with reads and stuff, and the proportions are all fucked up, all the animations are fucked up. And then you enter World of Warcraft, and the game's a goddamn disaster. And then you enter StarCraft 2, and nobody can tell what the fuck is going on at any point in time because of all the specularity highlights and stuff like that. Like, cartoon doesn't work in 3D. It pretty much never has, except for the most extremely specific stuff. For example, only now is anime kind of starting to create high-quality 2D out of 3D. You had Futurama as well, but in a real-time environment, I've never seen it done correctly. Exego gets pretty close because it has much better proportions than Warcraft. Yeah. I think all the resolutions are pretty similar. They just use it more intelligently. The environments have actual shadowing and stuff like that. Exego definitely, like, as a still image and as a terrain graphics and stuff like that, it's basically what Warcraft 3 should have been. There was no excuse for Warcraft 3 not being like that. But Blizzard's history with 3D is kind of hilarious when you consider that StarCraft Ghost was just to fish people out of that company.
It's really weird how when you look at it through the lens of it not even ever being a full build of a game, it actually makes more sense when you look at some of the screenshots, because like they were developing it for consoles, so some of the stuff that they were purporting to have didn't seem like it was even possible on that ancient console hardware. Remember, this is for like this is actually for like the GameCube and stuff, like the Xbox, the original Xbox. I can't say Xbox One now because that's marketing. And then you've got fucking what was the other one? The PS2, I think. So it was the whatever 7th console gen or something like that. I don't even know what we're at now, but that was it's weird that was in the case. You also brought up that something about anime, something about animation or cartoon stuff. Well, Patrick's been playing this DBZ game, this Fighter Z game.
That's Unreal 4, I believe.
And I only was able to see stuff through his low-quality YouTube stream. Not low-quality because he's there. That wasn't an unintentional diss. It was the stream itself. YouTube as a service. But the idea behind making... I've seen DBZ fighter games or anime-styled fighting games, and they've always looked distinctly different than an actual full
they've always
anime.
looked really bad.
Anime.
And then you look at Fighter Z, and it looks like an actual anime.
Right, so, that was what I was going to spring up, is that it actually looks looks better than fucking DB Super.
I've actually got a little bit of knowledge about that company. I don't know if he has played the earlier titles by Arc Systems, but I talked to a lot of people who competitively played BlazBlue and a little bit of Guilty Gear. I'm not familiar with Guilty Gear myself, but I have played BlazBlue. So BlazBlue doesn't use 3D. but Guilty Gear does. So if you look at those two titles, they look super similar, and they play very similarly. But one is actually 3D and one isn't. And Fighter Z is 3D. Fighter Z is Unreal 4, I think. So it's actually really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm looking at a screenshot of Guilty Gear now. I'll bring it up on the stream, and it's it definitely looks.
You should watch some videos. You should look up some tournaments for it because it's really interesting to watch in motion. And I think that comparing that to more modern Western fighters, like I think Capcom has released a couple recently-ish, and maybe Tekken as well. They're like full 3D. And the newer Mortal Kombat game, and compare those to Fighter Z or Guilty Gear. The Western versions just look like shit, and they're a mess for raids. Now, Blaze Blue and stuff can get pretty busy on the screen, but it's usually, not always, but usually pretty obvious, like when a low hit and a high hit happens. But in the 3D games, when everything just kind of meshes together, it gets to be really, really hard for me to understand what's going on.
And this is mostly due to a technological standpoint of it being 3D, it's not necessarily something that they're doing differently with the art itself.
Well, some of them try to capture cartoon styles in 3D, and that compounds the issue a lot. Because when you have something that's in 3D, you have something that's called perspective as opposed to orthographic, and this is one of StarCraft 2's big issues as well.
When they render sprites with perspective on?
Yeah, well, in this case, it's 3D because that's how a 3D perspective camera works. So everything is bulbous and out of proportion, but also the camera is rendering things differently than, say, in StarCraft 1. So because everything in StarCraft 1 is rendered from an orthographic perspective, you can do orthographic cameras within a 3D environment as well. I'm not entirely sure why Blizzard didn't do that. There's probably some consequence of doing it when the space is actually 3D. But it adds... I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it makes the distances of things look different. Like, the shapes and everything is going to change. Like go on to 3ds Max or something, change the camera from perspective to orthographic, or fiddle around with the field of view, depth of field, stuff like that. You're going to see the same thing. So that all compounds it. So obviously from a fighting game, you're looking from the side. So that's 99% of the time should be orthographic, but when it isn't, all the shapes and stuff tend to change even more than just... because they're three-dimensional objects. And all of that plays into reads. All that plays into reads a lot. And StarCraft 2 really, really struggles with reads. It is an absolute disaster for so many reasons. And I'll have to get into those later because now I have to go AFK. But I really recommend anybody who's interested in like the fighting games and reads and stuff to look up videos of those games because it's not something that's really easy to explain.
Well, that's okay.
It has a lot to do with how they animate the character models and make them like it goes better with a more cartoony style when you're animating them in way like to make it readable, animating them in ways where the movements wouldn't really make sense with a more realistic look. Like the way you're pulling off combos or moving your character around, the frames of animation. There's very few of them. The positions they have to go into, in a more cartoony art style, it makes it fits the setting and it makes it more readable when you're looking at like a cartoon and they're doing these weird things with the animation of their bodies. Like it's not as easy to read or it doesn't even look let alone appealing looking or fun to play alone when it's more realistic. Like a cartoony art style like that really helps with making the weirdness of how they're animating the characters.
Oh, it mitigates the issue of the fact that they're using these non-standard.
It doesn't take away from the readability, and it also doesn't feel like it's out of place when it's a more cartoony art style. You know what I mean? It feels like it fits better. And it's like it. I don't know. I think there's something to be said about when you're talking about art styles. You got to talk about how this fits into the setting and the story too. Like if you look at a game like StarCraft 2 that's really cartoony looking and it doesn't fit. It doesn't feel like it fits the setting at all. Like the story they're trying to tell, this art style like really takes away from it. It like brings you out of it. It's like it'd be like it almost feels out of place because it's cartoony and they're trying to tell this really serious story, and
it's like the contrast between like how like seriously they purport to take the story and the art style itself. Well, that's the thing that video games have struggled with for a while. I remember looking back at some of the old videos of those full motion video cutscenes that they would include on video games back in like before the Genesis. What was that console? It was like the
before the Genesis.
Yeah, it was like the Jaguar or something. Is that even a console? Am I making that up?
Oh, that is a console.
There was like some CD project something too, or
it's actually after the Genesis. There's a bunch of them because they had the Sega CD too.
Yeah, that was it. The Sega CD, I'm pretty sure, was the one.
It's an add-on.
Yeah. So I might be figuring or misconstruing the particular console, but there was a generation of consoles where it became a craze to have some sort of like real life video of these people doing stuff, like actors, basically.
Around when Mortal Kombat came out, yeah.
Yeah, so you would have all of these games that were purported to be like super realistic with their story or have a deep story element, and they would use these full motion, quote unquote, as opposed to like stop motion. I don't know what the fuck that's a buzzword for, but I remember that being on the marketing. And they would use these videos that were of like real life. They were live action, shot, edited, etc., movie type stills or whatever, and you would have these videos that were designed to tell the story or in some way accentuate it. But then you would get into the game, and depending on the game, you might be in for a completely different artistic experience. Just looking at the end user experience of visually taking in this information. It would really be it threw a lot of people for a loop at first, I'm sure. But this is before anybody knew anything about video games to really begin with. This is back in like the early '90s or mid '90s, I guess.
When it comes to games that are really mechanical and have like a competitive nature to them, that's like really hard to pull off that kind of what they were going for there and make it a type of game that would work in that way, to make it readable and make it coherent enough that people can dig into it enough to get to like a really high skill level. So it's
well, that's the other thing, is trying to express your skill inside a game that you really need to master in order to even possibly, like, you need to do so much more work in StarCraft 2 to understand what's going on in those battles.
Yeah.
Compared to its prequel, where
it's a type of game that kind of demands that you are able to look at the game and really understand it before you like get to that level, or if you want to get to that level where you're trying to really master it, and it makes it really hard to do so when it's clashing like that, and it's making it hard to be readable. Like even it doesn't even matter on like a mechanical level, like the story, like everything clashes in that setting with what they were trying to go for. It's pretty much a disaster when it comes to story.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at the I just posted an image also in the special bus where you're I don't even have to qualify this. I just have to ask you, which image of these two do you think looks better aesthetically, more consistent for the purpose of playing a game from this angle or whatever? And I mean, what would you pick out of the one that's on
the one on the right?
Yeah, and that is orthographic rather. The one on the left is perspective. So that's like a good illustration of the difference. Now, it can be massive changes like that, but it can also be much more subtle changes that will still incorporate some element of measurable difference in the output, where it will still, sort of skew it in a weird way, where you'll feel like it's a little strange that things aren't exactly at the angle that you necessarily expected.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of instances where it's subtle. There's a lot of instances where it's extreme like that.
Animating in that style too is very like, it takes a lot of work with the which one's orthographic, the one on the right or left?
The right.
The right. So what's the other one called?
It's perspective.
The other perspective. Animating characters that you're like animating something that the player controls, and the perspective style is like, you have to. It's very hard to do. It takes a lot more work, and it, like, if you don't animate it correctly, like the characters, or if they don't look distinguished enough to be in that set. Like you can't. It's way harder to show what you're doing in that setting and and have the player feel like it's. I've been experiencing that problem when I've been streaming Crash Bandicoot actually. Like you have a lot of stuff where it feels like the camera's all fucked up, but it's because of the perspective that you're getting that it's actually fucked up. Where you're trying to do platforming and you can't land on stuff that you're trying to land on, or you can't get down to that level because of the perspective they're giving you.
Well, another issue is the idea that, like, trying to... Well, I guess the reason why people would go for perspective is because for a while you had side-scrolling, games back when everything was 2D. So now they've broken through with this 3D thing. Wow. And the idea is that now you can change perspectives and you can have a free moving camera in some capacities, although obviously everybody knows God of War and the like don't actually do that. Then you have situations where, okay, I can have a free moving camera, I can have camera of different perspectives, but then, what ends up happening is all of these experiments lead to an inconsistent end user experience. Now, when you have a situation like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2, which are RTSs, they have a default camera angle, and it's fixed in a sense where you can only move it and zoom in and out in a specific, to a specific degree.
Angle, yeah.
Right. So it's not quite as fixed. It's not quite as fixed as StarCraft 1. It has more movement, but the idea that you would have to... I feel, at least, that the idea that you would have to scroll in or whatever to change your angle to better see certain units seems like almost a fundamental design flaw of the game in the first place. Like, if I can't see units through other units or whatever, that should either be a feature of the game. Like, think of... when you're in a situation like in StarCraft 1, you lift off your barracks as a Terran player, you fly it over your siege tank, and now they can't select your tank specifically, and you have a bunch of other units on the field.
It doesn't work with that style of game. Like, it takes away from how you're supposed to play it.
Well, I think that in StarCraft 1, it can be considered more of a feature, because now I'm blocking you from actually being able to specifically target my tank, and that is such a niche situation that there's a bunch of other balancing fundamentals that go into it.
You're using it against, you're using it as a strategy, but in the other instance, it's like being used against you. The game, you're fighting the game.
Right.
It's not like you're fighting a...
Well, because you can manipulate it or something, yeah. So there's a weird disconnect between those two instances. And I've seen professional level players in Warcraft 3 have to scroll and figure out exactly where one unit is, and they're they're straining to read past all the particle effects that are flying around. Even the professional players have a lot of difficulty reading the stuff. They go, "What? I didn't think that was going to happen," and it's not because they just didn't anticipate the proper damage or whatever. It's just because even after all these years of playing the game, it's not a young game; it's old. And even after all of these years of playing this game and mastering it, they still have issues with readability, and that's something that I don't think you're ever really going to solve as a developer if you're attempting to, if you're what you're trying to do is design something that's supposedly you want to design a competitive game, which is what Blizzard purports to want to do with all of their RTS games. Ever since StarCraft 1 took off, they realized it's a lot of money to be made in esports.
Yeah, you want to be able to dig into this.
Yeah,
but you can't.
But you're developing in a space that actually actively works against competitive health. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is a more utilitarian approach to the idea of graphic design or art styles, because now we're talking about technical limitations or technical elements of a art direction that prevents you from being able to fully have a good experience reading the game, playing the game, and interpreting what it's sending to you, which is really fundamental and really important. But there's also another angle we can attack this from, which is just aesthetically. Now, I've had this image up on camera for 10 minutes now, and I can't help but think that the one on the right, I'm willing to admit that this might be some personal bias shit, but the orthographic perspective seems like it's a lot... not only is it more visually consistent, because I'm looking at everything from the same perspective, but the idea that, if you told me I have to play game A or game B, I would almost always go with game B from that perspective, from that camera, because that to me seems way more reasonable, way more aesthetically pleasing, and it like I'm looking at the way that the shadows are going, and it feels very consistent that way, and it feels like I'm able to experience all of this stuff in a uniform manner without nearly as much problems reading certain things. Like things instantly become way more clear when I look at the right image. And I guess that is still more of the utilitarian. Well, it's easier to read, but I also think it looks better when I can read it. So obviously these two things kind of go hand in hand.
Like I like even if you look at the image on the left, like it like completely, to me it like takes me out of it. Like I agree, I would much rather play on the one on the right, but when I look on the one on the left, like you can see like void space in the background where there's nothing going on. The one on the right feels like it's like just
it's
more,
a complete game. Like there's more of a game world around that.
Like it feels like you're in an actual world, not like a manufactured environment. It's easier to get into that one, just like on the aesthetic level.
Well, and even if there was no Necron void space in the background, there's still a big element of like there's more of a design challenge now to design some sort of skybox and some more stuff. Like I just think that this was designed as a mock-up just to show the artistic direction.
Yeah,
I don't think this is from like a specific game.
It's just to show the difference, or
right. But I like to think that I think back to like Armies of Exego as an example I brought up at the beginning. There's one scene in that game where the characters are like some of the characters are looking out in the distance, and what they're supposed to be seeing is the Fallen, this like fucking evil race or whatever, this ancient evil from another alien planet, which is, I guess, the only thing cool about that is that they're aliens instead of just ancient demons or something. But this race is supposed to be like destroying their world and actually like summoning forth their home planet to this world to fuse them or something weird like that. And it's supposed to be some sort of apocalyptic thing that's happening, some really cataclysmic event. And the way that they illustrate this is like a really fucking no way to put it, shitty, low grade, really pixely like 2D skybox texture that's just slapped on the sky. They're not really looking at any event. I don't know how you would present that in a... I would much rather... Okay, so here's how I guess you could present that differently. Even if your cutscenes, like were in StarCraft 1, where the in-game cutscenes were all done in the same perspective as the player played the game, I would far prefer being able to see from the in-game HUD or whatever of Exego as like an opening mission briefing, whatever you want to call it, where you go forward and what they're seeing, like they're on a cliff, and then the camera pans over to what they're seeing, so you get some like drama there or whatever cinematography awards you want to give me for that one, and then at the end you just end up with this sight of a whatever the site actually is. Like you're actually designing whatever you're going for in that instance, and that to me is way more that to me is way more like enjoyable and immediately impactful, because now I get to see it, but it's consistent with everything else I've seen while playing the game. So these cutscenes aren't showing me something that I've never seen before. They're not showing me something... Well, they are in a way that there's more content, but they're not showing me something in the context of... it's completely alien and foreign to everything else that I've read in this game up to this point. Yeah. They're showing me something that's consistent with the same perspective and everything else, and they're using the in-game stuff as opposed to trying to do what we were talking about earlier with the Sega CD shit, where they would have these like crazily different art styles, because obviously real life is a completely different art direction than whatever your game is going to do.
Yeah.
And it sort of goes back to that DBZ Fighter Z thing, where you have the whole idea is like now you're playing what is in essence the same thing that you were watching on television, visually and aesthetically.
It feels like it fits, and it's also like, by the way, that game isn't like it's not like they have like state-of-the-art graphics or anything like that. Like it's done with minimal effort when it comes to like the technological level, like the industry standard for like graphics and particles in that game. Like it's all very very minimal, while it still feels like it feels way more impactful because it like the direction they took with it.
Which game?
Fighters.
Oh yeah.
Welcome back.
Hi.
Yeah. And it's like it's not you don't have to like force yourself to take to make these really high res models or do like these crazy animations. They use a lot less frames, probably because it's also a fighting game that they do that. But it still looks like it's in the Dragon Ball universe, like it fits, you know.
Well, that's just the Japanese art style in general tends to be both very minimalistic and very like polished.
Yeah, like they don't go over the top with like trying to make things state of the art and high resolution. It is high. It's like the
production value doesn't have to actually be
high resolution,
yeah.
But the like everything else is like the way it's presented is obviously, but it doesn't have to be crazy over the top because that would take away. It would be harder to do in that vein when you're.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's easy to over-engineer it.
Yep, it's a lot of wasted work too. It's not going to go into anything. Like it's not going to help, especially a fighting game. Any game that's like you can get really mechanical with. It's going to be way harder to do that with when you're working with like the highest quality. Like it not only does it not feel like it fits, it's harder to read when you're doing like when you're working with all of that. Like you can't really dig into it like you would be able to.
All that said, Fighter Z is actually made with the most advanced engine on the market right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Like it's making use of the most advanced features.
Yep.
It's just they know how to measure what they're doing with it. They don't engineer their end result.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is really funny because you'll get a lot of boasts from a lot of other companies that purport to be using these like industry standard or above industry standard materials or tools or whatever, and yet when you look at what they turn out, it's usually never as internally consistent as something like what I've seen from Fighter Z. Like the idea
look at Blizzard.
Well,
look at
that's
Blizzard.
I mean,
use
it's
Unity.
a pretty good example.
They use Unity for a fucking card game. They produce a shooter that looks worse than Unreal Tournament 99 and performs worse than comparison shooters. They have an RTS that is probably one of the worst performing games on the market right now for the CPU. They blame the i7 architecture as opposed to fessing up to the fact that they're using something that is slower than Java. And with all the end results, they end up with something that looks worse than something that came out of 2004. All the jargon that these companies use about industry standards or whatever doesn't amount to anything. Like, you have games that talk about PBR. PBR is physically based rendering. And to put it in a really, really overly simplified layman's terms, it is a different way of handling the color maps and the roughness and stuff like that. It's supposed to be more physically accurate. And I believe Blizzard says the overweight is supposed to be using PBR. They don't even have real dynamic lighting in that game. And they boast about how their game looks. And if you look at any given video or screenshot for that game, you'll see fucked lights everywhere. You'll see tangent issues everywhere. You'll see the most basic of the basic of the basic shit people figure out when they first start doing 3D. You look at World of Warcraft, they can't even be consistent with their own shit that they produce. Half the game has these overly bright painted lighting and the scratch brush they have copy-pasted onto 99% of the textures within Photoshop because it adds weathering. And then they mirror all the UVs. They fuck up all the UVs. I just did Mist of Pandaria. You look at the Great Wall of China, there's fucked UVs right in plain sight on the outside of it. Goes from fucking port to stern across the entire goddamn continent.
You're talking about
the only reason
Mulgore's
people
Great
brag
Wall?
about what their engine or game has is because they know that apologists won't actually verify anything they say.
What is this?
This is really
Is this
what
a
it comes
real?
down to.
Is this a real screenshot? Can you verify this? I'll start posting these in the cauldron, so they're more hidden from the plebs. Is that?
Oh yeah, you posted an orthographic. I think that's like a kind of an unfair comparison because the orthographic camera is in a different position, but that is a good example.
I was mentioning back at that point, not to retread over it, but I was mentioning that usually the comparisons are not as extreme where the perspective is so far different than the orthographic. Everything else I was looking at was more similar.
That to me, it looks like those were already modeled with orthographic in mind. So
right,
it
yeah,
came out pretty well. But with something like StarCraft 2, it wasn't modeled with anything in mind.
Yeah, it's just a 3D asset that you look at from.
It was just we lick Windows, so if the window tastes good, we'll publish it.
I found this on. This is the first image when I searched. Wow, Great Wall. And this is the first image that pops up. It's in the cauldron. Do you want to take a look at that mess? Can you verify that this is what you're talking about? I'll post.
So that's the area I'm talking about.
It.
But what I'm talking about is even more evident because that's on the lowest quality settings.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, like that's really, really obvious because it's even more blurry than usual.
Well, I don't know. It was from a YouTube thumbnail, I think, so.
Well, YouTube is like even worse than cancer.
You hear that, YouTube?
Yeah.
So have a look at this.
Okay.
What am I even looking at?
Stretchy.
Have a look at
this. Yeah, but what is this even supposed to be?
A wall, I think.
This is 4 expansions in, by the way. Have a look at this.
So, note, can I enable my... No, there's no way I can enable my cursor. Oh, well.
Look at this.
Above the halfway point of the image I have
like
on
a magic
screen right now,
trick.
So this one here, you're gonna need to look at sort of closely. It's there is a radial fuck of UVs for the grass here. By the way, to make proper UVs on something like this, it is literally like a 2-click process.
That
literally a 2-click process.
Bad. Stretch.
I have my character on the screen there because I'm showing you how big these actually are. These are not small objects. They were probably originally small objects back in like 1997 when they first made them, but then Jay Wilson came in and doubled it.
They unchecked the maintain aspect ratio box. Holy shit. That looks horrible.
I have the grass one on screen now, and here we can see a giant X. They forgot the D,
again, it looks like how come everything Blizzard does looks like a magic eye trick? Like if you cross your eyes, like the top part of the grass stands it stands out so much from that whole stretch section. Like it looks like you're looking at some kind of fucked up perspective where that's like a drop off or something.
Just don't look at
the only way that this kind of stuff happens is if who's ever making it either just really doesn't give a fuck, or he's intentionally being malicious.
Like, and in that last one, oh my god!
Yeah,
those last ones there, clipping from the grass, like clipping into it, you could say that mountain is really far away.
That's crazy.
So the stretchy stuff, the super low res stuff, and the fucked up grass, that spans 2 zones.
Okay.
So this is not some isolated area. It's the border between Krasserang Wilds and Valley of the Four Winds. Blizzard was like, we can't make this overhang cliff with our existing height maps, so let's make static meshes. But then whoever made the static meshes made them originally in like 1997 for their Diablo 2 prototype engine they threw away. And Blizzard was like, shit, we need these things and we don't know how to make them, so let's just pull them in from these old archives we've got. And this is what you ended up with.
Exposed.
Don't they have a lot of? I feel like they have a lot of the same issues in the remaster of StarCraft.
Oh god, just a few fucking screenshots I've seen of that disaster.
I might have some I can pull up actually.
Like the units look completely different, the buildings look completely different.
Well, everything looks floaty in that remaster.
Yeah, they look like they're
everything
superimposed.
Is floaty. Like everything's hovering above something else. Like it's weird.
I remember that Blizzard put like a Gaussian blur filter on the Brood War screenshots for their comparisons to try to make it look worse.
Yeah, because they actually, I remember that because they did. Yes,
they did.
There was some comparison shots of terrain, and I was looking at this terrain stuff, and I was like, I actually compared it myself, their new terrain to some screenshots from SEM Draft, and I was like, what the fuck? This is way more detailed than their screenshot. What happened?
Yep. Also, in their comparisons, you can see some really obvious stuff, like the Dark Archon doesn't animate correctly in the remastered version.
Well, neither of the Archons
are like 60 FPS or something.
Neither of the Archons are centered still, by the way. I don't know how you do that one.
That's something. can't be
Well,
fixed.
there's another wall here I never looked at. I'm gonna have to go back here and record this because I'm sure there's gonna be something fucked up here. There's all these halls here. I'm actually in a good area here. I can get you guys some more screenshots here in a few seconds. There's like this game is like there's some things in this game that don't look too bad at all. Like there's people who had the potential to create something that wasn't colossally fucked up, but there's like always this conscious decision to just not give a shit because the people who play these games don't give a shit. So why would we invest the extra 2 seconds to push a couple buttons in 3ds Max and end up with a UV map that isn't this radial band of fuck? Or push the bake lighting button after we place all of our objects. Like really basic
simple stuff. It's so simple. Like you see that is so evident with that remaster of StarCraft.
Well, you just take a look at the screenshot I put in. And...
It just looks like their assets copied and pasted into like the whatever they were using to make it. They just put them there, and that was it. That's all the effort we're gonna do.
Well, there's another issue with that though, is because they allegedly found unused technology within the engine, which I guess I believe because the engine's a fucking disaster.
Well, they didn't even know how MPQs work. They switched cask for no reason at all because they didn't even know that MPQ even supported half the features.
Wait, what does that mean? I'm not.
MPQ is Mopac archive. It's what they use to store
Blizzard
data.
Was using
all maps
Mopac
were
2000.
Okay.
And probably still is.
All of their
because they couldn't
maps
make
are
their own...
MPQ archives. All of their EXE are. I think their original EXE isn't an. I don't know what the fuck their original EXE is.
Their patchers had to unpack the entire game to patch it.
Right.
Which when MPQ etc. has never had to do.
Yeah,
because
you just
they don't even know
file.
how their own format works. They don't have anyone on staff who even knows how to make shit for their own.
Well, they're still
game.
using MPQ in StarCraft 2, or they were. So I don't know what
they've been using cask since.
Oh, they must have updated it then because they when Wings of Liberty I think Heart of the Storm still had MPQs. Maybe that was why they deleted all of their mod files.
It launched with MPQ, but they all those use cask now.
Yeah.
And cask is disgusting, by the way. It's horrible. It added so much load times. It doesn't do any of its jobs correctly whatsoever. I don't know why they use it, other than maybe because they needed more CRC. So this is a big issue. Like, I'm willing to look past their copy-paste of other people's art styles and other such things, as long as the end result looks okay. But as is so often, especially in World of Warcraft, you see just fucked lighting everywhere. If they fix the UVs and fix the lighting, this game would actually look like it came out in 2005 as opposed to like a 1997 prototype. But they don't. This area is 4 expansions in, and the lighting is fucked. This isn't a limitation of the technology. This is Blizzard just not giving a shit. There are plenty of places in this game where this doesn't happen because somebody didn't have an extra chromosome.
Well, yeah, that's a lot to ask from people in this day and age.
Yeah, it's not even consistent.
So here's one of the things that I wanted to bring up is the idea of your art style or art direction being unique and how that is... Well, I see a lot of people who don't really know how this stuff works in the back end. And a lot of the times they will say, well, I'm looking at art styles and I feel like, if I were to try and design something, I would want to make it look really unique. And that's usually, in my opinion, like the wrong place to even start. You want to make sure that you can... Like, there's so many technical aspects to making stuff look good. And they're not necessarily really difficult to do in isolation. But the idea that you're going to make something look good and the idea that you're going to make something look unique, in most people's minds, that's like one and the same. And I far prefer somebody taking an old, tired, disgusting, dead horse-beaten art style or direction or whatever, something incredibly cliche, red fucking smoky eyes. I don't really care what you do as long as it looks good at the end of the day. As long you can be Dark Souls, you can be Legacy of the Void, but if you look good with that direction that you've chosen to go, then, well, for one, now you can maybe use those skills that you've learned to design something that is unique, but also looks good. And for another, you can... just generally speaking, you'll have a better idea of what actually looks good for whatever you're going to make next, even if it isn't, or even if it is just more of a copy paste in that department. And I think that execution generally trumps concept, because the whole idea is that even if you're not thinking at all about what you're actually designing, if your principles are correct and if your fundamentals are correct, then you'll design something that is redeemable in some respect, that justifies itself. And then you can work on thinking about designing something that has some substance to it beyond the surface level. But the point is, if you can't get the surface level good, then why the fuck are you going deeper? And that's something that I've always wondered. But people like Jay Wilson, they double it and they go deeper, so I don't know.
They're very much about going in deep.
You?
Holy shit.
So what we're looking at right here is it's an entrance to a dungeon. So if you look at it from really, really far away, it doesn't really look too bad. Like, this would work for, like, a skybox.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this isn't a small object. This is a huge fucking object. And usually you're right on top of it and close on the ground. And when you're on top of it and close right on the ground, it all looks like complete and total shit. So, and then you got that fucking scratch brush on everything. None of the specularity / cube maps have alpha masking on them, so
well, I'm looking at the last screenshot here, and the UV mapping on that brown rail above the the brown rail above the bronze or whatever.
Yeah, look how huge it is.
Well, it's huge.
Like,
you compare that to the boxes in front of it. That's whatever.
My camera is fully zoomed out. Most people do not play with their camera fully zoomed out, but I do. And even at that distance, I'm not even right up to that thing. Even at that distance, that still looks like something that came out of Bubsy 3D.
Yeah, but
this is literally what Bubsy 3D looks like.
Yeah, but the railing has, first of all, the bronze below the railing is somehow way less. It's way, like, the resolution is way smaller than the railing itself. But the railing has that scratch brush you're talking about. That's not even correctly UV mapped. Like, look, they're just sticking out. Like, there's no attempt to make a similar or mirrored UV map.
More UV maps? I'll show you more UV map.
I don't double me, Wilson.
I'm gonna double you, man.
That's the gayest thing anyone's ever said.
There's no excuse for this, though. That's the really fucked up part. Like, there is no excuse because
look at, like, this. People will say, like, I was actually streaming World of Warcraft, but before I started the first ever Big Boys Table, and on that stream, I mentioned how World of Warcraft looks so bad. I'm looking at it. This was after I'd created a Mongol character to do some shit while Mesk was talking to me. So I'm walking around in Mongol, and I'm a fucking cow. And there's these people that are, there's some people in the chat who are just like, well, of course things are going to look less defined. I mean, it's a MMORPG. There's this huge expansive world. And, look at all the stuff that has, like, all of the world space that exists, generally speaking.
There used to be a reason for that. Back when games came on discs, like, you couldn't, like, you had to take steps to make it, like, you couldn't fit.
Right.
The files became too big, but now
that wasn't even, that's not even what they were arguing. They were just simply saying that there was so much.
I've got bad news for you guys.
There was so much to develop in the first place that because there was so much to develop, they necessarily had to spend less effort on certain environmental things just to make more environments.
I've got bad news for you guys.
What?
Those WoW screenshots are from, that purple one is from the last expansion prior to Legion, so that's very recent. This screenshot is older than World of Warcraft Vanilla, I think. That is from Unreal Warfare era, which predates Unreal 2.
What a juxtaposition. Holy shit.
And in case you're wondering, Lineage 2 was a small-scale MMO, maybe it was higher quality because... no, unlike Blizzard, who did their darnest to kill world PvP and stuff, Lineage 2 is most infamous for its world raid bosses and castle sieges.
Yeah, isn't Lineage 2 the game where, like, you were experiencing some lag issues or something in it, but then a comparative problem in World of Warcraft just shut the entire server down, or was that a different game? It's obviously an unrelated
I have never covered Lineage 2 in any of my recordings. I want to do so.
Oh, maybe it was a Guild
the average
Wars
monster
recording.
looks like in Lineage 2. Compare that. By the way, there's no normal mapping, no bump mapping. The most that they have within this engine is a little bit of old-style specularity mapping, which Blizzard only started using within Mist of Pandaria, and most often the case, it isn't even masked correctly at all, so it just looks like shit anyways.
It's used selectively. It's not even a good system.
Lineage 2 has a lot of optimization and stuff in it that just doesn't really look that good, but, yeah. Its overall style and everything is far better. Like, this is not a realistically styled game. This is a very cartoony styled game.
Yeah, this is like a fantasy
but,
setting.
It was made by people who actually have artists in their company, unlike Blizzard. So, yeah.
Holy shit, that last one actually looks pretty... Wait, what year was this?
Hang on, let me find it for you.
2008. I think your
release
image...
dates October 1st, 2003.
2003? Oh boy.
I mean, Lineage 2 has seen expansions and updates just like World of Warcraft has, but it's been free to play for a while, and it's been very niche for a while. And most of the updates haven't really tried to overhaul everything. Everything that you're looking at within this shit right now is stuff that's like completely new for Blizzard. It isn't like we updated stuff, except the fact is that they
concept
say they go over
this
these
dark
things
elf on a this dark elf on a beast that's armored. This isn't concept art. This is an actual model in the game with textures and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is
those are super low poly, by the way. They're very, very low poly.
From an economic standpoint, like the money, like you can't even bring money into the argument. It's like they had so much less to work with. Blizzard has all this money, and it's still like they
look at this.
They still did better.
I just took this screenshot right now. You've got this pole with incorrectly mapped textures. I'm actually there's two screenshots I'm gonna get for you right now. It's just gonna take me a few seconds to get to them. They are Blizzard copy paste things and then changes the wrong textures. They're good.
That's such a huge juxtaposition, a world of difference from a 2003 game to this. Well, the thing is, like,
it shouldn't even matter the year either. Like, if you just look at what it is, like that's bad enough. The fact that you add, oh, this is 2003, that just stacks. Like,
well, this is the other thing is I brought up at the beginning of the very beginning of the podcast talk show, whatever the fuck this is, just rambling, I guess. The beginning of this ramble, I talked about, or I asked the question, does Blizzard have an art style? But look at all of the different World of Warcraft screenshots that we have gone through. Look at all of the different. These are within the same like game. Sometimes within the same. It's sometimes even within the same expansion's worth of content that these worlds of different.
One screenshot. There's like 5 games, art styles copied and pasted.
Yeah.
Like that's insane. Come on.
It's just
nuts.
World
of Warcraft isn't even consistent to itself. I'm going to show you that in a few seconds here. We're going to find some objects. I'm going to take some screenshots. You are going to be disgusted.
I mean,
not to have.
At least I'm consistently disgusted. That's about the only consistent thing I have going
like when I was coming into videos, like the only thing Blizzard has been consistent in is their inconsistency.
Yeah, that's fucked.
Like normally when units like disappear or despawn, they kind of like fade out. But I'm sitting right in front of all these bugs that just fly in and then just immediately despawn. Like they just instantly vanish.
The amount of times I've been watching these. What were you doing? The Nightborne quest or something in your latest videos before the 4.
They don't even apply the fade effect to everything.
Well, he was Mesk was running through the Nightborne quests, and every single like quote unquote cutscene, just interaction with these NPCs resulted in them just like vanishing after they were done.
Just sharp
or they would be in one spot, fade out, and then when the fade out finished, they would immediately respawn in their starting location, just facing like waiting for the next person to interact with them.
Might as well.
So
what
are they doing?
A T-pose with it. You might as well just throw in.
I want you guys to look at the screenshot. So the ring thing specifically, the goatee ring. Okay, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now.
Wow.
This here is 5 seconds behind me.
All right, let's see. Oh, okay. All right.
So those rings have a wrong texture mapped to them, and that's been copy pasted for quite the span of terrain incorrectly.
That's funny. Holy shit. I guess that's just a solid error that they've. I'm sure they know about it too. They're just not going to update that.
Oh yeah, they know all about that.
Why do they? Is that just part of your perspective, or is that the way that it looks like there's a fisheye effect, but only on the pillars in that first screenshot?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Like the perspective.
That's just how out of proportion they are.
Yep.
Why do they get fatter as they go down? Were they trying to were they
It's
upset that
structural
people
integrity
were
was
assuming
never
that
anything Blizzard considered.
no, were people assuming the gender of this fucking pillar and they needed to widen it in the hips? Like, what the fuck is going on
basically.
here?
This is so fucking absurd. Like, every single photo is a Magic Eye screenshot. Like, it's a Magic Eye game. They even see in a magazine.
So that's a big part of this whole idea is that you would want to make your game not only readable, but it's not only readable and consistent, but just aesthetically
look at the stretching.
Anything.
Like, okay, like I get it. World of Warcraft's an old engine. They don't really want to devote a lot of resources to retooling an old engine and adding new features. Like, I get that. But this is like the most basic execution you learn when you start doing 3D graphics. I'm going to show you guys another object here. And it is some of the absolute worst shit I've seen in Mist of Pandaria other than those cliffs and stuff. And it's like, there is actually literally no excuse for this stuff looking like this. Age is not an issue. Technology is not an issue. Money is not an issue. This is stuff that if someone puts this in your game, you fire them because they're not even doing their fucking job.
There's a consistent amount of errors in the style. Like, it's the same errors all over the place. Like, the texture mapping one was particularly funny to me.
Just
like,
there's this big fucking log between town long steps and dread wastes, missing like that one, and every single fucking thing on this log has problems.
Hey, this is completely.
This is a large object, literally right in your goddamn face. Your guys are gonna love this shit.
This is out of the blue, but is there a real faction in World of Warcraft called Darkfallen?
There's a lot of dark. There's Nightfallen. Or what the Netrunner called.
Some dark spirits.
Dude, you got the full spectrum on that last one. Holy shit! Oh man, how come every screenshot you take, it looks like you glitched out of the map and flew too close to an object? It's like you're not supposed to get this.
This is ground level. This is right in your face. This is right where you're crossing for doing daily quests.
Like, it doesn't even. How can you even tell what's going on? Like, what is this? This isn't a game.
I would think I'm on DMT or something. What the fuck am I looking at?
Yeah, this doesn't even make sense. Oh my god, that tree, dude, that last one you posted blows my mind. Everything about that one is an error. There's not. It doesn't. Oh man, it doesn't end. Wow.
It doesn't.
Oh, I guess we're on the. We're playing original Doom with that one. What the fuck is this?
That's a 32 by 32 alpha mask. Used for a texture that should have been about 2000 by 2000. This is not a bug. We were looking at in this last screenshot with a puke. That's not a bug. They wanted it to look like that.
I don't even know what that is. No idea what I'm even looking at.
It looks like you're in space with lava and some fucking. That is DMT
looks like
right there.
Sideways rock horse next to a pit of acid on top of like, that doesn't even make sense. Stop. Like, that's not a thing.
It is in multiple expansions, actually.
Hold on, my phone's ringing. I'll be right back.
All right, bye. So now we get to the part of the podcast where we have to try and make sense of this tragedy. So we've shown comparisons between this game and some other games. We've discussed, Dragon Ball Fighter Z, and we've discussed some of the other, comparisons between 2D and 3D, orthographic and perspective. We've established some fundamentals, and we've laughed at Blizzard for like an hour. And now I just have to wonder what exactly should we be looking for in the future? Like, is there any games recently that we haven't already discussed, or at all, I guess, that we haven't already discussed, that would speak to you as good or acceptable 3D design from an artistic, like, graphical direction, or something that is on the right track? Dragon's Dogma. Okay. See if I can find some.
I'm going to show you another screenshot here. and it's not going to be really obvious what it is. I'm trying to get myself into a position to show you, but
you gotta
so
finagle
these trees
yourself.
are supposed to be dropping like pollen or something. I'm not really sure what it is, but again, this is a really like the biggest issue with Blizzard isn't their, you know, art style, quote unquote, that they stole from other people, or, you know, the fact that it's so inconsistent, because that is a big issue. But the fact is that in the execution, they always just don't give a shit. These particles are supposed to be in the tree. You've got this giant, like, building-sized particle emitter just floating over there fucking somewhere. This is all over the goddamn zone. So if I was if someone was to say, what kind of game do you think that looks good? And I'd say Dragon's Dogma. So Dragon's Dogma had 6 months development time. It was under the shock call of Capcom, which is well known for being shit. It was made by, I believe, the same team that made Devil May Cry 4, which is another pretty decent-looking title. Dragon's Dogma has a host of performance problems on the PlayStation 3, and that's in large part because of the engine. There is a PC port. It performs well. It's very, very low res because it's an open-world game. You can think of it as kind of like Skyrim, except it has actual content in it. And
is there a subtitle to this game? I'm only finding Dragon's Dogma Online screenshots.
Give me a few seconds here.
Sure.
I will see if I've posted videos of this, but I'm gonna see if I have any immediate screenshot. Yes, I do. I know I do. I just gotta find them. But Dragon's Dogma is Japanese, obviously, and it is most well known for its comparisons to Dark Souls because it actually has a combat engine unlike Dark Souls, but most of its bosses and stuff are really easy.
Is
so
what
yeah,
I just
you
said
found a good
something?
screenshot.
That's one. That
So,
is
yeah.
from it. Okay.
So I'll find you something more here. That one looks like it was post-processed.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks a little advanced for what you were talking about. More.
Dark Souls was it EOCap or the game? I mean, I would say like even though I'm not really fond of Dark Souls, I would say that as far as like art styles are concerned, Dark Souls has a right. Like Dark Souls 3, minus the many issues with it, as far as like the proportions and, you know, the direction and stuff is concerned, that is a good example. That is a game that looks quite reasonable. And all the issues therein mostly come down to execution, like poor raids or, you know, collision or any of the other innumerable issues people are going to have with that title. Final Fantasy XIV as well. Final Fantasy XIV is a cartoony title. It is cartoony styled, just like Final Fantasy XIII and many of other Square's recent stuff. But the proportions and everything like that are much more believable. In fact, you're going to find if you look at a lot of Asian titles, including Lineage 2, they're all very cartoony. None of their styles are realistic whatsoever. The difference comes down into their intent with the direction. The Asians sit down and they say, we're going to make a quality product. And they do. And in the case of Lineage 2, if you look at it, it looks super dated. Like a lot of the weapon models and stuff, they're using like planes and stuff. And they still are higher fidelity than anything in World of Warcraft. They still look a lot better. There's some jankiness in certain things, but the animations and stuff are typically smoother. They carry more power behind them, more character. I mean, you're going to find a whole host of issues in the terrain and stuff because it's very similarly limited to that in World of Warcraft. But when you do like a side-by-side comparison, Lineage 2 stands out in pretty much every manner, including like audio and stuff as well. And I have no idea where these screenshots are. I would just load it up and get you some. I don't actually have it installed right now. Oh, here we go. I got some. Okay, let me see.
Let me see him. Give him a little kiss on the cheek.
All right. So, Dragon's Dogma. This is from the PC version. It's the PC version is not, like, I wouldn't say it's as good as a console version because yes, it's higher resolution and stuff, but as a result, the consistency gets broken a lot. When you're in the high resolution of the PC version as opposed to the console, you start to notice more inconsistencies and stuff. But I will post these screenshots anyways.
Well, the lighting is a lot different than fucking World of Warcraft.
Oh yeah. So remember, this is a port. They did some changes for the PC version, but the stuff like the dynamic lighting and stuff, that was in the PS3 version. I don't really have like beauty screenshots. These are just general screenshots I took while silly things were happening. So Dragon's Dogma isn't just well known for its lighting and stuff because you have the lantern system. Night and stuff is actually dark in this game, and lighting is a really big keystone for this, having lanterns and stuff. And the other thing is the spell effects. This is the main thing that causes the PS3 to die, is the spell effects are ridiculous. Like, as a caster, you actually have powerful spells. So this is not a very good screenshot, but if you look in the air, you're going to see enemies in the air. The spell that I'm casting there actually summons a tornado. And the tornado is insanely large and very strong.
It looks it.
And I don't really have a lot of great screenshots here, but something I would like to make note of is, you know, I do have some other screenshots. Let me see. Oh, I actually have some good screenshots here. So this is unrelated. This is an asset from Lineage 2 I updated for StarCraft 2. So what I did for this was I made normal maps for it, and I assembled it within StarCraft 2. So that's actually a screenshot from StarCraft 2's editor. That's not rendered from 3ds Max. That is actually from StarCraft 2 itself.
Okay, let me grab that one. That's going to be a good one. So what modifications did you make to this?
I created normal maps for it and configured its materials. So this was literally about like a 10-minute job to update something that was from Unreal Warfare era, very old. Modernize it for StarCraft 2, so it has specularity, it has normals, it has all of its animations and everything configured for StarCraft 2. That takes me about 10 minutes. You'll notice it doesn't have a lot of the issues StarCraft 2 stuff has. I've paid very close attention to specularity so we don't get those highlights. So when you're out in RTS view, the high detail doesn't create a lot of noise. So StarCraft 2 stuff is very low detail, but it has those sharp specularity highlights, especially like the Zerg and the Terran. So that those create detail is the thing. Those highlights create detail. So even if your textures are low resolution, the highlights are based on your topology and your normals. And that makes them noisier than they really are. That's it adds a lot of speckly high brightness spots to them, which causes them to fuse together a lot. That is one of the main issues that StarCraft 2 actually has issues with YouTube as well, actually, because encodes don't like contrast when they're very, very compressed.
Well, I know that there is a fair bit of issues with a lot of the Zerg units, in particular with specularity. Like, trying to read... Well, I guess particles would probably be fucked up, too. It's just not a good practice to have a high amount of specularity, as far as I can tell. Not when you're going for stuff that's remotely detailed. Like I was looking at... What was that dumb game? Sequel to all of those Supreme Commander games. Planetary Annihilation? Not Total Annihilation.
They were basically like, let's make a phone version of Team Fortress.
It was... that RTS had basically no... There was like no details in the graphics from what I was seeing. I haven't actually played more than a couple seconds of it, but the end result of the graphics definitely didn't sit very well with me. It was very like minimalist, I guess you could call it, but it was like they didn't even have textures on the units a lot of the times.
They just looked like shit. It was a disgusting looking game. But that's where the trend has gone, because you see Team Fortress 2 was successful. And Team Fortress 2 took Warcraft 3's graphics and dulled them out, because they realized, oh, all these highlights make a fast-paced game like Team Fortress really hard to follow. And then Ice Frog tried to get into Blizzard, and Blizzard said, fuck you. He went to Valve. Valve was like, sure thing, they'll take the most popular name in all of Warcraft 3. And then he copy-pasted the Team Fortress 2 adaptation of those graphics. And then League of Legends copy-pasted it, and Blizzard was like, oh shit, we gotta copy-paste this for Overweight, but we don't know how to do that. So their iteration was completely fucked. And then they never updated anything. And it was actually really interesting. I actually kind of like League of Legends as an example for this, because a lot of the proportions in League of Legends are exaggerated, but they're not like really out of place. And most of them, except for their newer stuff, like all the Void crap, is pretty easy to follow. like they say about the mid-range models like Ari and even Kled, Zack. You know, they're all pretty like busy graphics, but they're very easy to follow and they're not really out of proportion. And meanwhile, Dota 2 just looks like a fucking mess.
I was never really able to get into Dota 2's, like, I was never able to really read a lot of that. But I figured that was almost intentional.
Became so washed out.
It was weird because Dota 2 obviously deliberately copied a lot of things about Warcraft 3's engine. So it made sense that they would have battles be as confusing as possible, just like Warcraft 3.
Yeah, it's a terrible game to play. It doesn't feel well to play. I don't know how anyone can stand playing something so sluggish and so, in a way, artificially difficult because of that.
It's definitely less responsive than most of the other games.
And it's very hard to find detail. Like, the thing is when you start like changing the proportions of stuff, it gets harder and harder to recognize them. You kind of have to relearn how you read things because in your day-to-day life, you're used to seeing things in a certain proportion, and your brain thinks, okay, that's a person. That's a person's arm. That's a person's leg. You know, that's a vehicle. When you throw everything out of proportion, you have to relearn everything, which not only adds a barrier if you're looking at something like a spectator sport, nobody's going to have any fucking idea what's going on in any of these games whatsoever. It's going to take them forever to be able to follow it. Even at like the high level, a lot of people still have a hard time following League of Legends teams fights because everything's out of proportion. The particles are really badly designed, etc., etc., etc. When you throw in all the proportions like in StarCraft 2 compared to StarCraft 1, all the things in StarCraft 2 look like toys. They don't look threatening whatsoever. So there isn't that mental, conscious association of certain things. This plays into sounds as well. Sounds are super important in this regard, which StarCraft 2 fails in even more spectacularly than graphics. Just think of all the Zerg sounds and how utterly unthreatening they sound. How they all mesh together. That all plays into reads. The fact that all the Terran explosions are using the exact same sound.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure
a
lot of them actually use the same sound effect for some weapon effects and stuff.
Yeah, they literally do. For most of them.
And even when there are actually different, a lot of them are sampled from the same set of commercial CDs anyways, so they end up
they're all overcompressed. They're all overcompressed. They've all got the loudness work going on. So what happens when you've got a big fight is all the sounds mesh together. They all fight each other. They all mesh together. Even if you use something like ducking and priorities, you can't fix it once it's started.
Yeah,
you can't change it. You have to change all the assets.
The idea that you go from, I mean, that definitely compounds visibility issues in your game if you can't read it through audible cues either. Like, I've been playing a lot of CSGO lately and watching a lot of professional CSGO, and a big part of that game is sound cues. But another big part of that game that they've started updating their maps is they've started updating the maps of the certain areas where there's a lot of action in the game generally. They would make the background of that area, like the whatever, the fences or walls behind them or whatever, they would make them more single colored so that it was easier to pick out enemy players who were up against that instance, up against that area. And that made, sort of changed the way that you were able to read the game by virtue of having less complex, less busy things to look at when you're looking for a specific read. And I think that went a long way into making some maps like they've updated Nuke in this regard, so that they made a lot of the areas, a lot of the fences, they added these white boards that would make it really easy to pick out any player that was there. In some cases, a lot of players thought that maybe this was making the game artificially easier on those maps, but I would argue that it's I think you can probably make a good argument for that, I guess. It just sort of depends on how frequently they do it. I wouldn't want to be playing, an FPS that's necessarily designed where every surface is not even textured, because you got to be able to pick out the player models. But I like the direction that they were I like the fact that they were willing to experiment with something like that, because the whole idea is that it improves readability. And if people are trying to improve readability, then by all means, I'm not going to stop you. So what are these?
Screenshots are from Final Fantasy XIV. This is version 2.0, as it's called. Well, these specific screenshots are obviously a lot later in 2.0. 1.0 is actually much higher graphics quality overall. But in the 2.0 version, they wanted to take a World of Warcraft direction with the game because that is the trend of people making MMOs. Is World of Warcraft was successful, so we have to copy World of Warcraft. 1.0 Final Fantasy XIV had a lot of problems. The graphics were not one of them. But they decided to dumb it all down and make it for a console, so they're not nearly as high quality as they once were. But the overall style and stuff is pretty good. Everything is stylized and cartoony, but the proportions and everything like that are easily recognizable. I've shown some of the more fantastic examples here. The second guy being a Rogadin, they're like, you could think of them as like half giants or something. Like they're the biggest characters.
He's a big boy. Alright, he deserves a spot at the table. He's got some. He's got it all going on. So this would be an example of a more consistent one, is what you were saying?
Yeah, this is very consistent. So I'm going to show you something else. There's a good screenshot for you. But I'm also going to show you something. I've noticed this a lot. Blizzard, ever since Cataclysm, I think, they started hiring out to DeviantArt for their loading screens. Now, what I want you to do with this Heroes of the Storm loading screen, so obviously the faces look really strange, and that's been like a long-standing issue ever since Cataclysm. But the guy on the left, that's actually Kael'thas. I want you to look at his foot. What would be his right foot. And I want you to look at his shoe and the sizing for the shoe. And now I don't know about you, but on my feet, I've got a big toe and I've got a little toe. And the little toe, usually the shoe conforms to the little toe and it's biggest on the large toe. But if you look at Kael'thas's foot and his shoe, his foot is actually in reverse.
Yeah, that's pretty... that's, might have a cerebral palsy or something over there. I don't know what that is.
I'm going to show you some more World of Warcraft here.
Oh.
Remember, they went through these zones in Battle for Azeroth, the expansion that is not even released.
That just looks like a StarCraft 2 screenshot, honestly. Looks like you're sending me the texture mapping for Banelings.
Yeah. The Zerg. If only they looked as good as the Silithid stuff. They don't.
Depressing.
It is depressing. Like World of Warcraft has a lot of ideas in it that were they executed even like half competently, they could have turned into something pretty reasonable. But
well, that feeds back into the idea that we were talking about earlier, where I don't care if your concept is necessarily unique. A lot of people have really neat concepts. Like I was looking at it was like some undead bastion in Northrend or something that you were going through, and the walls were very reminiscent of that was it. There's the walls of these battlements or whatever were really reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, and that's not a particularly unique concept. Obviously you're copy pasting it from somewhere else, but they were executed at least from a far away distance, they were executed in a way that was better than most of the other games' execution, regardless of the source of the concepts therein. So I really like the whole idea behind that, basically, is the idea that you're looking at something that, yes, it's not super unique, but it is particularly it's executed in a reasonable manner. Maybe it's not great, maybe it's only average or whatever, but it does the job that it sets out to do, which is more than you can say about a lot of the rest of that game. So when you do see something that is just average or maybe even decent, it's still... It's better than what you've been seeing, so it stands out in that regard. Maybe that's
it's like writing,
Yeah.
You're never going to find original writing in most of these games because they're all using the exact same source material. But as long as it was executed well, which World of Warcraft and other Blizzard stuff most certainly is not by any stretch of the imagination, then it's all right. Like, I use Bulletstorm as a good example because there's nothing about Bulletstorm that is remotely unique in any shape or fashion. But it's a game driven by dialogue, and the dialogue is quite well designed and well voice acted. And the dialogue is what carries it. So the end result of the writing is, at the end of the day, you don't really care too much about the writing as a whole. You care about the character interactions because that's what drove it, and that's what was executed well. And then that's what carried the writing and the experience through it. So even though the game had like quick time events and a lot of other really disgusting stuff in it, overall, like the writing aspect of it was actually pretty positive, even though there was no effort in it to make something unique at all.
Yeah, so Bulletstorm is a funny example because obviously the voice acting is really what carries it in a lot of respects. But like you said, the dialogue itself, I mean, if the dialogue was really bad, then there's no way to, you can only carry that so far, regardless of your voice acting. I think you were actually talking about, was it a World of War, or maybe it was Diablo 3. You were, I was listening to something where you were referencing the fact that the female wizard had was really trying her heart out to make something out of nothing with that script.
Yeah,
and you can
yeah.
You can have
you
a
can
good
really hear that.
Yeah, you can have a good individual performance within a game, but as a complete end product, trying to make something that feels like it justifies its own existence is a lot harder if everything about that aspect of the game is substandard and you only have like whatever one element that stands out, which would be like voice acting in the face of everything else being horrible. But where Bulletstorm, I think, did a pretty reasonable job with its voice acting and its pacing in general. I can't really remember any glaring issues where I felt like it was paced poorly. Generally, I don't like cover shooters, but the idea of you had like that what was that weird leash, I think it was called, where you could like slam people in the air, you could do all this weird shit.
Yeah.
Like that helped break up the pacing of the gameplay. So then the story pacing itself it had less pressure on it because it wasn't a Call of Duty where you're just running between corridors and shooting people from cover.
Dragon's Dogma is also an example I would like to use for that too. It is written with archaic English, and it's actually relatively consistent. In fact, Demon's Souls as well. Also, the audio quality is very low, but the actual voice acting in Demon's Souls, they use like radio actors or something like that. It was actually very strange because they never did this again.
Yeah,
and then the voice acting in Demon's Souls was actually quite good, even though they didn't have much to work with in terms of like the dialogue or the whatever. And Dragon's Dogma was really very similar. There is similarly like decent voice acting and stuff in it, and consistently like archaic and stuff. And it is really funny coming out of that because, you go into World of Warcraft. Okay, now we go into like the what is probably the highest budget expansion, which was Legion, and they have a couple of good voice actors in it, namely Khadgar, but so much of it is so abysmally bad. And of course, any of the voices done by Metzen, like Thrall and stuff, like it's horrible. Illidan is bad too, and like they had obviously at some point someone doing their job correctly and the rest didn't do their job. We did talk about unions and stuff, so a lot of it's probably outside of Blizzard's control because they're stuck in a contract. But
right.
And then you look at these games like Dragon's Dogma, which was very, very low budget, only had like 6 months to basically redo the entire game because I forget the reasoning why. Why about explain it to me before I forget? But it was a 6-month game. A lot of it is missing shit. In fact, some of the classes are even missing like a lot of stuff in them. So, but you look at it and they still had the pawns, who have multiple voices, all fully voice acted, tons of chatter dialogue and stuff, some of which is quite hilarious in certain contexts. And the rest of the dialogue, like the dragon, was really good. And like there's a few mistakes, a few bad deliveries and some stuff, but there was a lot of it that was just all consistent and all decent. Like you had, I forget what her name is, but if you're familiar with Berserk, she is a reference to basically one of the characters in Berserk, and her voice acting is in French, and that was also really well done. There's the court jester; he was really well done, and some of the pawn voices are really good, and a lot of the NPC dialogue and stuff, it's like there's an accent to it, and a lot of it is actually quite genuinely believable. Now we enter World of Warcraft again, and you've got Miss Pandaria. So obviously you have like the Chinese voices, but it's like an American guy doing the Chinese voices. So a lot of them are really, 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 like I would actually consider them, like if I was Chinese and this was like the expansion where we're supposed to have Chinese accents, I'd actually probably consider it racist if I was a liberal, because a lot of it is so fucking badly done. But there's still more emotion in most of those voices than anything else in the game. That's the thing.
So you're telling me that
accents and stuff are really bad, but the emotion in a lot of voices is there, unlike so many other areas.
So they hired you to say ni hao in an emotional context?
Yeah.
Or...
I mean, on one hand, Blizzard is probably thinking emotion scares their casual audience. So
I wonder if that's like we talk about that a lot. We talk about like that they seem to avoid
really wouldn't be
stuff
surprised There's a lot of games that are like they have like people who are evidently voice actors, but they never deliver with emotions. And I wonder, do emotions scare casuals? And are Blizzard super conscious about that?
It would be really interesting to get in, like, be a fly on the wall in the context of, during the voice acting sessions of somebody like whatever Mengsk's voice actor is. I forget his name, but he is the only one with any voice inflection and real emotion in
He abandoned
Heart
a
of
lot
the
of it in
Swarm.
StarCraft too, though.
Well,
like especially in Heat of the Swarm.
Yeah, but just like it doesn't really have substance. But you remember the final? I think it was the final cutscene where he's getting impaled by tentacles or whatever, and he's like, "I've made you into a monster, Kerrigan," and he's actually
I don't even
like
understand
yelling.
that line.
Well, that's the thing, is it may not have a lot of substance. It definitely feels
like that's a weird thing to say
awkward
when someone is killing you. Like,
yeah,
it actually really reminds me of World of Warcraft, where a lot of the lines you get handed when you start attacking things are really bizarre.
Well,
like, is this really the things you're going to say when someone starts swinging a sword at you?
Well, that's just like the opening of Heart of the Storm, actually, where those Umoja Marines were like, "There are guys shooting our door. We're gonna be attacked soon." It's like, yeah, you sound like you're in the middle of a battlefront, motherfucker. You wanna try that once more?
Well,
with
we're already
feeling?
being attacked because they're shooting our door.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things that just don't make any sense in any context. I said sex. Oh man, that was dirty.
Fraudian.
The rating for your stream just shot up to like X.
D. Happy birthday, Necron.
No. That's a $350 fine.
That is. Too bad Officer Todd doesn't have a voice. That'll be the future of AI, where I can code a Discord voice bot that just speaks to you and yells at you.
Discord does have text-to-speech.
Yeah. That's cancer, though.
The voice of Todd will be both terrifying and confusing.
I was actually interested in trying to... I was actually trying to get the Alexa voice. This is completely off the topic, but while we're on the topic of voices, of AI. Amazon's Alexa, where actually Patrick has one, and somebody bought it for him, I guess, but he has it hooked up to his light, and he was telling me he had to get a Wi-Fi update for his light bulb. A firmware update for his light bulb. It got me. Like, just to imagine that one. But... he always does stuff, and I told him, and I was like, yeah, you can make her say stuff. You just say Simon says, and then whatever you want to say. So of course the first thing that he had her say was like self-deprecating stuff, saying that she was a big fat baby Tony guy or something. I don't know. And I really wanted to get that voice, because that's like a recognizable voice now, and the idea of having that as like a character in a comedy project or something where you just have Alexa.
The Windows XP voice is a classic.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure how to replicate it without actually having Windows XP, though.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I would have to record it, and you can't digitally... Maybe you could, but it would involve plugging an Amazon machine into my computer, so it's probably not going to happen. But the idea of, like, a cohesive voice experience, I think it all plays together. Like, one of the reasons why Bulletstorm was an enjoyable experience was certainly because of the dialogue and the voice direction, but I also, like, there were some offensive areas art-wise, now that I'm thinking back to it. It's an epic game.
It was a console port on Unreal 3, and like a lot of the graphics had issues, and a lot of the gameplay had issues, but
it's really funny because
the context of the writing and the voicing.
This game was designed by the people who designed the engine, like the same company, and yet it still doesn't use the engine correctly.
Yeah, it didn't use the engine very well at all, and they were missing things like depth bias alpha and pixel depth all over the place. I remember there being lots of clipping particles that shouldn't have been there.
I also remember hearing recycled Gears of War sounds inside that game and thinking, wow, that's interesting. Have you played Gears of War?
I actually possess it. It's been on my to-do list for about 5 or 6 years, actually. I have an Xbox and I have an Xbox 360. I've ran the Xbox 360 for a total of maybe 5 minutes since I got it years and years and years ago, and I've only used the Xbox maybe for about 10 more minutes than that. Oh no, I played through Halo 2 is what I did. I haven't ever played those Gears of War, but I'm actually really interested because Epic was a company that was like, oh, fuck PC, console's the way to go, and then they came crawling back after Gears of War. So there has to be a story you can extrapolate from that. Like, something horribly wrong must have gone with Gears of War.
Well, the color palette for the first game was it's like gunmetal gray, dirt brown, and then some like dirty green. And I think
so
that's
very
probably everything.
Killzone-esque stuff.
Yeah, it's not quite as desaturated as Killzone, I think. Like, I guess I'll just go and try and find a screenshot of the original Gears of War 1. Hopefully it hasn't been fucking remastered like every other game.
Because Killzone, I thought that it was too post-process heavy, but it was definitely one of the better-looking shooters that I've played. The main issue with it was so sluggish to control.
Okay, I found a screenshot, actually. Let's see if we can pull that one up. Pull that shit up, Jamie. Oh, wait, I'm not Joe Rogan.
But then you had Unreal Tournament 3, and that's like one of the worst fucking shooters I've played in a really long time, other than Overweight.
So there you go. I don't know where this is ripped from. Oh, it's GameSpot. You can see right on the bottom right. So it's probably from a YouTube video that's been re-encoded 10 times, but blurriness aside. No, I think that actually is more or less from the source. That's the first Gears of War.
That kind of reminds me of Turok, which isn't a good thing.
Well,
that Turok game on the PS3 is it's quite a work of art.
So the idea of... I'm just going to pull it up on stream so people can understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So Gears of War is a game that I've played the first 4 Gears of War games. The first 3 to completion. And they obviously didn't give a shit about the story when they were designing the first game, and then had to dig themselves out of a hole to design sequels because they wanted to cash in, you know? Oh, the game was successful. Yeah, I mean the game's successful, so let's do some more of this stuff. Let's take this story further.
They probably never expected StarCraft to be successful in the way it was. And then
they
have, like, oh shit, we have to hire a writer.
I don't know.
And then they're like, no, we don't.
That's actually funny because I don't know if this is. I've had like this weird theory in my head going back and forth where I've been thinking like, does it make sense to think of it in this context? StarCraft 1, you can extrapolate some of that ending, like especially the bonus mission where they're talking about like Duran's ultimate masters and how he's serving.
At that point, they'd already fallen into the deep end. So
right. But what I'm saying is like you can sort of reverse engineer from the ending of or the beginning of StarCraft 2 and actually the full breadth of StarCraft 2. You can sort of try and reverse engineer your way back to StarCraft 1, but at the same time, there's so much that doesn't make any sense. And obviously, a large part of that is just because StarCraft 2 doesn't make any fucking sense. But consider the fact that
well, Diablo retcons itself in his own manual.
Oh, that's pretty good. Is that the first game or just the?
And then there's the cinematics, where the Soul Stone gets tossed, but then it doesn't actually get tossed.
Soul Stone.
And like Diablo is a mess for retcons in general, so not too surprising. StarCraft.
Was that the Nightborn campaign and World of Warcraft campaign? You know what I mean? Where the quest line where they were talking about a keystone.
Oh yeah. That's in the Demon Hunters, but there's like keystones all over the goddamn game.
Yeah, why the fuck? Why did they just take? They literally just couldn't come up with a different name from StarCraft 2, or maybe StarCraft 2 stole it from Warcraft. I don't know.
They recycle a lot of shit between the two. The Void is really the same fucking thing. It's full of tentacles and shit. And then Riot's copy pasting off of that. Like I like it's so shameless and at the same time so utterly absurd how these fucking companies are basically shamelessly copy pasting everything off of each other.
You know where they got you know where Blizzard got the Legacy of the Void graphic art style. Oh, I don't even know if you've seen this. Have I shown you the cutscene in that stupid micro mission where Kerrigan and Artanis are DBZ Gokuing their way through the like this stupid map filled with hybrids with no challenge at all?
That looked like some really mundane shit.
Well, they had this like black and white art style thing that was like supposed to be this like graphic. I don't even know what it was. It was like this weird graphic novel approach to like they were supposed to be inspecting like basically hieroglyphs in this Zelnaga temple. Does this ring a bell?
I don't know. You showed me a whole bunch of videos. They all kind of mesh together. Maybe StarCraft 2 is such a forgettable experience.
Legacy of the Void. What would I even describe this? Zelnaga.
But I know they used the black and white thing when you were listening to the Overmind's AAA voice acting, and Tassadar were telling you about how the Overmind's not actually a bad guy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which, by the way, they've done in World of Warcraft countless times too. Now it's the Burning Legion that weren't actually bad guys. They were just trying to save you from the Void.
So look at that.
Which is, yes, very much copy paste of Zerg. Oh God.
So that's
we don't know how to make a cinematic, so we're gonna just have
look at. I really like the start. Like they just photoshopped in that little boom effect in the bottom.
Like they don't even try to make it look like something like a hieroglyph or an engraving. It's
it's like a comic book or something. I'm not.
Some guy on DeviantArt posted up shit and Blizzard stole it. You know, it's really funny because actually I use this example in WoW too. But
so
I don't know how much of my videos you've watched, but did you see the Alex Straza comparison?
Yeah.
So while I was looking for concept art for D&D, I came across an Alex Straza fan art. Someone made a 3D mesh for Alex Straza for Heroes of the Storm as a concept, unrelated to Blizzard. It literally is what it should have been. Something out of World of Warcraft that got updated for normal maps and stuff. And I'm thinking, this is fucking absurd. Where I run across some random fan art on ArtStation, and it looks like this is what should have been the official art. Why didn't Blizzard just go to this person and say, hey, here's like the budget for our entire game, $50. Give us this model, because we own rights over it and we can do that. And then suddenly you have a model that looks not like shit. But instead, Blizzard keeps using these fucking models. Everything from Tracer to, what the fuck's her name? And, Diva. Like, Diva has a face like that guy with a weird mustache that people are superimposing on stuff. I don't know who he is or where he's from. There's like a meme.
Hulk Hogan?
Like, her face looks like that without the mustache. Like, she looks like a man. Her face is as big as her whole fucking body. Like, they haven't had luck with faces since they started doing things in Cataclysm, since they replaced the loading screens. The faces on all their model updates are fucked. The faces in Heroes of the Storm are fucked. Here's some random nobody makes fan art that just destroys everything they've made after they made the original Alex Straza. It's mind blowing.
So look at this. Look at this second screenshot that I sent you. That is from Brutal Legend, a game about metal.
Yep.
And this game is a parody. Like it's not a parody. It's like the story doesn't. It's like so over the top and comedic. It's like designed not to be taken seriously. It's the same thing. They copy pasted it from like that.
And this is art from an album, I think, or is it Warhammer or is it from? I think he said it was from an album.
Yeah, that's an
album. Yeah. I'm looking at it.
What is that?
That's in the style that Blizzard had in their original concept art, except it's executed correctly.
Yeah, that reminds.
Yeah, that's ancient.
You're talking about like the fucking Metzen Rainer drawing.
Metzen, something that was noticed is Metzen actually, he can only draw his own face. If you look at his art, they're all his face.
That's weird. What is up with Metzen, man?
They had two concept artists. Metzen was the bottom of the barrel, and they just threw him into writing because he can write /fic, I guess. We also have a theory that maybe he was like suicidal and he like threatened to hang himself or something if they didn't give him power over the game or something like that. Like he was like, because the thing is that when you go through Metzen's writing, it's like edge in cheek. It's more like angsty than edgy. Like there's nothing really in the games that like really step into the realm of actually being genuinely edgy. But he like constantly skirts it. Like he's too scared to dive into it. Is really like there's just a lot of schizophrenia involved with Metzen. He's a very bizarre man. And they eventually forced him out when they realized they can just have an intern do the exact same thing that he does for a tiny fraction of the cost of the company.
The cost to the consumer is unchanged. Yeah. Your brain cells.
That'll only go up because now in order to have overweight, you either grind for, however many thousands of hours, or you pay an upfront fee and then pay a couple $1,000s in loot boxes.
Wow. Sounds like my fucking time. So, I figure we might as well wrap this up with final words, because I have to, same thing as last week. So,
there's actually something else I want to bring up, since we're talking about graphics and art styles.
Sure.
And we've brought up phone games before.
Yeah.
I just would like to mention that since I do D&D stuff, obviously I can't draw, so I go hunting for graphics. And
that's interesting.
these graphics that I find for phone games, for example, Puzzle and Dragons and Terra's Saviors, to the art, quote unquote, that are used in games like Overweight. And I use the word games very lightly because Overweight really doesn't classify as a game at all. And it's actually kind of embarrassing that like random people in Japan like just scribble up this stuff in huge quantities for these phone games. And the vast majority of that art is ridiculously detailed. And you brought up the references and stuff. Well,
yeah.
Puzzle and Dragons has like Final Fantasy and Attack on Titan and Dragon Ball Z and all these other things that have been, adapted in there, and they're all done super well, and a lot of them are really, really accurate to their source material, like down to like fine details and expressions and stuff. Like they really put a lot of effort into that, even though they're like probably for like memes or events or something. Like even though they were just obviously like a side thing and a reference, they still put a lot of work into actually making them accurate, not only to their own establishment, so sometimes then proportions get changed, but also to the original source material. It's kind of interesting to look at that because we are in the West, we are in like an arms race to reduce graphics quality so that we don't have to invest any energy in anything. While in Japan, even like the most minor things have rather noteworthy effort placed into them. Of course, there are exceptions, like the Souls games are very much not like that. And Capcom has been destroying everything they can that might have had graphics quality in it, but and Sega and stuff like that. But there are like games, even just like phone games and stuff that kind of stand out in the kind of detail that they've placed into just these images, these little tiny art pieces. Although I think there's like super high resolution art, and they're probably never find for a lot of this stuff, but it's kind of interesting. A lot of them will also have like fully orchestrated soundtracks, whereas the trend in America has been to drift away from live recordings and to use synthesizers and pre-established loops. Something that Blizzard does a lot. Even though Blizzard's music tends to have, at least for World of Warcraft, it tends to have like a clear amount of budget placed in the actual technical elements, they have been a very, very steadily declining in terms of their actual composition.
Well, you were talking about phone games where, obviously their monetization options is really where they break the camel's back. But apparently, like before or disregarding that, the content itself is actually decent in terms of its production value. I have been told
from several sources that a lot of the games are actually pretty fun to play, but when you actually start to enjoy them,
then you get time gated or whatever.
Yeah, so. Like, I can't really speak for that because I haven't played them. I was actually considering emulating one of them and trying it out. Obviously, I wasn't going to spend any money on it, but someone was going to roll me an account. And because you can, it was actually Grand Blue Fantasy. Apparently, if you just keep re-rolling your accounts, you can actually get a really strong character that'll carry you through a lot of the game very easily. So I've still considered doing that potentially when I have more time, because I think it'd actually be really interesting to read up on some of the things involving that, but actually also experience it myself, because I actually don't know too much about the games, other than that some of them are like JRPGs or whatever, but a lot of people swear by them, and some people seem to like to spend tens of thousands of dollars on them.
Yeah.
So there has to be something about them that is more than just the waifu aspect. There has to be something else drawing them into it. So I definitely would like to look at it, because I know in Japan, mobile in general is, like, obviously phone games and scams and stuff like that are a big thing in the West. But in Japan, there's actually a lot of legit game developers who are going to mobile because they basically see it as the future. A lot of them don't take consoles or PC very seriously anymore. I'm not really entirely sure why. I think it's because the average house income is not as high in Japan, so people with powerful PCs are not as common or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
At least that's how it was way back.
That was how it is in Korea too, which is why they have all those PC bongs around.
Yeah, also because of the internet as well, the internet costs and stuff like that. But it's definitely something that would be worth looking into, because apparently these games, they are fully featured games. They're just
they're locked behind all these paywalls or whatever for specific
paywall
content.
And everything, but
Well, I mean, we'll have to do some more investigation. This is obviously a topic we could talk about for many, many episodes, and I'd love to go in further detail. Like, we've sort of covered a bunch of breadth of topics, a lot of entry level stuff, and some more niche things like making fun of World of Warcraft. But the general,
that's hardly niche.
Yeah, sure. The general sensation, I think, is well comprised, I think we got it across pretty well in general, and hopefully
most people don't even understand how I can bring myself to record this series.
I'm one of them.
They're like, how can you do this? And I'm like,
how can you not?
I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. Well, I'm a glutton for going to the bathroom, so I am going to go do that while you enjoy World of Warcraft, the quality AAA 2018 experience.
Yeah, this entire time, I have been camping spawns, the Shaw of Anger and Nalek. And this is the World of Warcraft experience. You stand here waiting for something to happen. This is the true end game.
I can't wait to get to that level with my Mongol character.
Oh, yeah. What level is your Mongol character?
I don't know. I haven't played in like 3 years. Anyways, That was the podcast. Dick Suck has just vanished, so I don't know where he went.
He had to suck some dick.
Yeah, he had to run to the store, I think. So he's going to go get to the dick store. And I'm going to go to the bathroom, and
I'm
going
to squeeze out a deuce in the shape of a dog, a wiener dog.
Fucking dogs. Filthy.
His name will be Ted.
Bye, Todd.
Bye, Todd.
Happy birthday, Necron.
Happy birthday, Necron.